Hi, my name is Alyssa Castillo, and today I will be reviewing some tips and tricks to using your calculator efficiently in our calculator workshop. So some of the topics that we will be discussing are how to navigate the various buttons and functions of your scientific calculator, and we'll be practicing evaluating said functions with given x values, as well as practicing common calculations like the calculations of exponents, reciprocals, and converting fractions into decimals. Before we can begin solving equations, we first want to locate common buttons on our calculator. If you're taking pre-cal or calculus, the trig functions are going to come in really handy to you. And those are located on the fourth row of your calculator. We have them all within the same row: sine, cosine, and tangent. And if I wanted to do the inverse sine or arc sine, then I can press the second button, which is all the way up in the left-hand corner, and then I can press sine, and that'll give me its inverse. Similarly, it will give me the inverse of cosine and tangent if I press second and then those buttons. Let's find our log and 10 to the power of x buttons. So that's in our upper left-hand corner, right underneath the second button. So here's log, and if we do second log, that gives us 10 to the power of x. Right underneath that, we have ln, or natural log, right here. And then if I press the second button, then I can do e to the x. Exponents can be found a little bit beneath that. So if I wanted to do a number, let's say 10, to the power of something that's not 2, then I would use the caret button, and I could do 10 to the third. If I wanted to take the nth root of something, then I would press second, the caret button, and then I could put a number in there. If you wanted to do it, then you would have to put the number first, like the third root of some number. And then we also have our square for when we want to multiply a number by itself one time. And then we have the second, and then pressing the squared button will give us the square root. So these are a few of the most common functions on your calculator. Next, we're going to talk about the negative versus the minus sign and when do we use those. So the negative and the minus sign are two different buttons on your calculator, and it's really important to know when to use each one, or else you can end up getting the wrong answer. So the minus sign is what we use when we are subtracting two values, and that's found here in blue, and it shows up as answer minus. The negative sign is what we use when we have a negative value or a value that's less than 0, and that is found right next to the enter button. This little dash here signifies a negative number. This dash signals a minus, and you can kind of tell the difference a little bit because one is larger than the other. So like I said, the minus sign is used to denote subtraction. So if I wanted to say 5 minus 8, that gives me a -3. The negative sign tells me that it's a negative number. And when we use this negative sign in actual calculations, we want to be sure to use parentheses to ensure that the negative sign is attached to the correct value. So let's say I wanted to take the square of -1. If I do that, the answer that it gives me is -1, which is incorrect. So the way that I need to type this, if I want it to be correct, instead of the calculator doing the 1, squaring it, and then attaching that negative value to it, I should be putting a parentheses around that value. So parenthesis -1, close parenthesis, squared. And then it gives me 1, which is the correct value. So that was an example of how the negative versus the minus sign, knowing the difference between those two can be very beneficial. Now that we have an idea of when to use the negative versus the minus sign, let's practice solving an equation with a negative x. So this equation is 25x squared when x is equal to -1. And you might try to input this equation into your calculator as 25 minus 1 squared. And we get 24. And this is incorrect because I should be using a negative sign instead of a minus sign. If I was to actually say this equation out loud, 25x squared, I would say 25 times x squared. So we are multiplying 25 times this x squared, not subtracting it. So if I instead try to type 25 times -1 squared, actually using a negative sign this time, I end up getting -25. And this is because the calculator added the negative to the entire value instead of the one alone. And this is because this happens because I did not use parentheses. So I should instead be typing 25 times parenthesis -1 close parenthesis squared. And this gives me positive 25, which is the correct answer. And we could also type this in as a quicker way, not by much, but we could type it in as 25 parenthesis -1 close parenthesis squared, and this will also give us the correct answer. Now, let's try calculating one more example. Let's try to calculate 25x squared minus 9 over 5x squared plus 7x minus 6 when x is equal to -1. So let's separate this into two parts and first do our numerator, and then we will calculate for our denominator. So our numerator is going to be 25 open parenthesis -1 close parenthesis squared minus 9, and for that we get 16. And then for the denominator, 5 open parenthesis -1, close parenthesis squared plus 7 times parenthesis -1 close parenthesis minus 6, and for that we get -8. So now we're going to divide our numerator by our denominator. So 16 divided by -8, and we get -2. While I still have the calculations up, let me tell you how to retrieve your previous answers. So on scientific calculators, you can retrieve your previous answers, and that can help you not only complete your calculations quickly, but it can also reduce the risk of you typing numbers into your calculator incorrectly. So say you're dealing with a really long decimal, it takes away the risk of you typing that decimal in incorrectly. You can just go back and retrieve that previous answer. So let me give you an example. Our last problem gave us an answer of -2. Say we needed to square that. We can simply press the square button and it gives us answer squared. And when we press enter, it gives us the answer of 4, which is correct. So we can also choose where to insert our answer. Let's say you wanted to do 100 minus 4. You can type 100 and then minus second and then negative, and that'll show up as 96, which is also the correct answer. Another thing that you can do, which is very helpful if you're doing really long calculations, is you can go back up and retrieve your calculation of, let's see where it is, 16. So if I wanted to get 16 and bring it all the way down to the bottom for a calculation, I can press second, answer, enter, and then it pops up on the bottom row. And also using these arrows is very helpful. If you finish a test early and you want to go back and check your calculations, you can do that. Let's talk again about something that we went over a little bit earlier, which are exponents and nth roots. So exponents can be entered by using the caret symbol, which is like if I did 5 to the power of 3, this little guy here. And this is equivalent to saying 5 cubed. So this is 5 times 5 times 5. And if I wanted to do the inverse of this, so if I wanted to do the nth root, then I can do 3, second button, then I'm pressing the caret symbol, and then 125. And that'll give me 5. So a neat little thing is that a lot of times the second button will give you the inverse of whatever the main button is. So we saw that when we were looking at sine, cosine, and tangent. We also see that when we look at the caret symbol, the x squared symbol, log, and natural log. And one other thing that I want to mention is that you only want to use x squared when the value is squared, only if it's to the power of 2. Any other number, we use the handy dandy caret symbol. The cool function of your calculator is that it can convert decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. So my calculator specifically has 2. I'm not too sure if the TI-30 X2S has them as well, but on that one specifically, you can press a second button and then PRB. On mine, there's 2, and I'll show you both. And that's the TI-30 XS. So let's start off with 0.45. So I can do second and then table, and that'll give me 9/20ths. But I can also do 0.45 and then use this little double arrow right before the enter button, and that will give me the same thing. If you're trying to convert a fraction to a decimal, however, you have to do something a little bit different. So you have to use the fraction button, which is ND, numerator over denominator. So you put in 1, use your little down arrow, put in 4, and then you can do the double arrow and it'll give you 0.25, or you could use the fraction to decimal symbol, which is the second table, and it'll give you the same thing. So with calculators, you have options. Just figure out which one works best for you. For our last topic, we're going to talk about calculating reciprocals. So if you haven't heard the term before, you may be asking yourself what it is. So the reciprocal of a non-zero real number n could be any real number, so say 3 for example, is 1 over n. So the reciprocal of 3 would be 1 over 3. And if we have a fraction form of this, so 3 over 4, the reciprocal of that would be the same thing but flipped. So the reciprocal of 3 over 4 would be 4 over 3. And you can calculate this in your calculator. So let's say we wanted to find the reciprocal of 5 over 6. I'm going to use the n over d for numerator over denominator, put 5 over 6, and then I'm going to use the reciprocal button, which is x to the power of -1, and it's sandwiched in between your caret and your open parenthesis button. I'm going to type that in, and then I'm going to press enter, and that gives me 6 over 5. And knowing what we now know, we know that this is indeed the reciprocal of 5 over 6. And if I wanted to get the decimal number for this, I would simply use either method that we just learned about, and I would get 1.2. I hope that calculating reciprocals made sense, as well as the entirety of this workshop. I want to thank you for watching our calculator workshop, and please feel free to contact the Tutoring Center with any questions you may have, or stop by in order to meet with a math tutor. Our phone number is 210-784-1307, and you can come visit us in cab 202.